Firstly, can I just say thank you to my friend and colleague Joanna Rubinstein from the World Childhood Foundation for inviting me to share a few thoughts with you all today. Joanna is actually a member of the board of the Global Partnership to End Violence, and I'll say a little more in the next 10 minutes about who we are and what we actually do. There are 1 billion children every year, it is estimated, experience some sort of violence. That's unacceptable. It's also preventable. And I want to share with you today some thoughts, both on the magnitude of the problem, but the magnitude of the opportunity that we all have. What do we mean by violence? At the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children, we define violence very broadly. So violence encompasses violence, abuse and neglect, everything from corporal punishment in the home through to violence in schools, FGM, child marriage, trafficking, slavery, online abuse, etc. It's a very broad agenda, a very ambitious and very broad agenda that we are trying to address. Who are we? And what right do I have today to be standing in front of you 3 weeks into my role as Executive Director of the Global Partnership to be talking about this? Well, let me first actually just pay a huge credit to my predecessor, the founding director of the Global Partnership, Dr. Susan Bissell, who may well be known to some of you. Susan had a dream a few years ago, which she took from a dream to a vision and a reality of a UN-hosted but independent initiative set up as a rallying cry but becoming a platform to actually address this enormous challenge and the significant opportunity of violence, abuse, and neglect against all children. What's our vision? Our vision, notwithstanding the size of the challenge ahead of us, is a world in which every child grows up free from violence. It's the right thing to do, and it's enshrined in all sorts of conventions which you'll be familiar with. But it's also the smart thing to do. And that, I think, is where we need to take the conversation as a community, as an ecosystem of practitioners, experts, and others who want to end violence against children. What do I mean by the smart thing to do? I'm going to give one particular figure today, which is this $7 trillion figure. I'm not going to explain the mathematics behind it. I know that you are hearing later on from Jeff Sachs. He may explain a little bit more about this. He may not use this precise figure. That, by the way, I think is an issue in the community. We need to get straight on what numbers are we talking about. But it's the order of magnitude of the violence that children either experience or witness during their childhood and the impact it has on them and then those around them, including their own families, in due course, over a lifetime. So numbers crunched by some very smart people who figure that the problem, the cost of violence against children in all its forms rolls up to the magnitude of $7 trillion. Which is a huge opportunity. It's not just the right thing to do and the smart thing to do, but right now, and what excites me particularly, is we have a real moment in time. The Global Partnership was set up on the back of the global goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. There is a specific goal, SDG 16.2, for those of you that like the details, that speaks to what we are trying to achieve by 2030, which is to eliminate all forms of violence, abuse, and neglect against children by 2030. That's one part of why we have a moment. We have an intergovernmental process through the SDGs behind us. But it has to be so much more than that. It has to be cross-sectoral, it has to be societal, and it has to go broad, and it has to go deep if we're going to pull this thing off. So the moment isn't just that the fact we came out of a global government UN process. It's actually that also I think something is changing in the zeitgeist right now. I think I've seen, and so have you, I'm sure, a lot of various hashtag campaigns over years, many of which are very ephemeral. But a few now, such as the Me Too campaign, seem to really be sticking. And there seems to be a growing feeling, a growing desire among people across the world for some certain attitudes and behaviors that we have accepted are no longer tolerable in this century, which is a good thing. And that's why I also think we have a moment that we can leverage with that change, I think, happening around us. A good piece of news is that, because of the size of the challenge, we actually know what works to an extent. And we promote something called the Inspire Framework, and you may not be able to quite see the detail, but one of the exciting things about the Inspire Framework, which I'll show you a little more of in a moment, is the collaboration and the agreement behind it. And in my experience over the last 20 years or so, broadly in the international development, philanthropy, foreign policy space, it's very rarely that you get a particular framework or an approach that is agreed even by this number of agencies. So the World Health Organization, CDC, UNICEF, the World Bank, and others. And that is, again, a huge opportunity which we have, that they have all signed up to one particular framework based on and put together with their collective expertise and knowledge of what needs to happen if we're to end violence against children. Okay, so here's the other side of that, is we know what works, and it's a lot of stuff needs to happen. I'm not going to read out what's on this slide. I'll leave it on for a moment as I speak. I will just call out one particular piece, though, because I think you can immediately see some of these things, and you may come from a country or live in a country where some of these things have happened to a lesser extent or not. I think one of the critical things for Inspire to work, sometimes you're building these things from scratch, but more often than not, it's how do they join together? So you're looking at the child holistically, you're looking at the child across their childhood and adolescence, and making sure all of these various services, etc., are happening, but they're happening with a degree of coordination, with the child at the center, and with the priority of ending violence, abuse, and neglect against that child. The particular one I'd like to call out is the norms and values piece. It's no more special than any of the others, but I do think there's an agenda which can accelerate action, laws, policies, program, resources that are needed for all the other things if we change the conversation or even start a conversation globally, regionally, countries, communities about ending violence against children, why it's right, why it's preventable, why it's smart, and why we know what to do. But part of that is changing knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors, both grassroots up, but also top down as well. So what do we do at the Global Partnership? We do, broadly speaking, 4 things. And as I said, I'm 3 weeks into the job. And so this is where my starting point, but I'm right now in the market to grow the ecosystem and learn from other practitioners such as yourselves who play such an important role. The first thing we do is support progress on the ground. We do that through a combination of technical advice and providing catalytic funding to countries who sign up, who put their hand up and say, we would like to do better on ending violence. And we have a process we go through with those countries. Secondly, we have a role where we actually commission as well as consolidate and share data, evidence, and stories from the many organizations, governmental down to grassroots, private sector, media, academia, and others, working on this agenda. Using all of that, both what's happening on the ground, the learning, the data, the evidence in real time, and the stories, I think we have an opportunity to catalyze a movement, and we need to catalyze a movement. Not a single advocacy campaign or even a multi-year campaign, but actually grow a movement around this. I'm happy to come back another time and talk to you about how that might work. But that, for me, is a really big piece of what I think is the go forward here. And fourthly, mobilize resources. And that's not just for ourselves, but if we successfully get this issue on the global agenda, if we successfully make the investment case of why it's a smart thing to do to invest in ending violence against children, make the case that we know enough about what works to get on with it now, I think that we can grow the pie for everyone. That's not for ourselves, it's not for our partnership, it's not for our team. It's growing the pie of global resources that will flow to all the organizations who are working to end violence against children. What can you do? Know the facts, I've shared a few today. Promote the solutions. We love the Inspire framework for reasons I've described, but I'm agnostic to a point about other frameworks. It's about doing something to end violence against children. Grow and share the evidence. I know there are sessions coming up this afternoon about data and evidence and learning and how you take scientific research from research to action. That's all part of the agenda. Partner across sectors. From whatever sector you're in, many of you are obviously health professionals, but beyond sectors and across sectors, join us and join the movement. And I think my parting thought really is that 1 billion children are relying on us to get this right and to do it by 2030. Thank you.